Hi, I'm Jill with the West Regional Branch of the Mobile Public Library, and today I'm here with a book recommendation. I want to recommend The Elenium by David Eddings. This book was originally published as 3 separate books in the late 80s and early 90s, but now it's been collected together in one omnibus edition that you can check out from the library. And I am recommending this book not because of the quality necessarily, but because of the history. So just to get into that a little bit. It's a high fantasy quest novel, or well, trilogy, and it was, as I said, it was originally published in the 80s and the 90s, and back in its day, it was a massive bestseller. David Eddings was basically at the time the father of the fantasy genre. I mean, he still is one of the fathers of the fantasy genre, but in the almost 30, 40 years since he was originally publishing, he's kind of disappeared from the map. Like, we actually have his name carved into the portico here at West Regional amongst all of the famous noteworthy authors, but at this time a lot of his books are out of print, and the only one we've got in the library is the Elenium, even though he did write other books. And I think that's a shame, because if you've read his books, you can see how very much he influenced the authors that have come after him, even though I would say quality-wise he's maybe not quite as good as some of those authors. So specifically the Elenium, which is the one that's still in print that we've got here in the library, it is, like I said, it's a quest fantasy, and there is a queen who's been, poisoned by magic means, and the main character Sparhawk has to assemble his group of loyal sidekicks and then go on a quest to get the magical MacGuffin to cure the queen, save the queen, and defeat the evil bad guy, and save the kingdom. So it's a fairly standard setup. If you really identify with some of the characters, which different characters strike different chords for different people, you may actually love the book. If the characters don't sell it for you, it's probably kind of mid. You probably enjoy it if you like a fantasy, high fantasy book, but it may be like one of those ones you read and you go, well, that was fine, and then you set it aside and forget about it, which I think is probably what happened for most people, which is why David Eddings is still not remembered quite so fondly as Robert Jordan or even like Robin Hobb, because even though they wrote, their books are getting pretty old too, still people are getting new readers and rabid fans every day, whereas David Eddings has been kind of forgotten about. But like I said, I think you'll probably, if you like the genre, I think you'll enjoy it. And a handful may really love the books. That wouldn't surprise me at all, because they're competently written. They're decent fantasies. They actually, I would say they follow all the tropes of the genre, but in actuality, I would say really they set a lot of the tropes of the genre, which is why I think anybody who's a fantasy fan should read them. David Eddings was originally writing books when Brandon Sanderson was in elementary school. And he was a major bestseller. Like, anyone who loved fantasy read his books, because at the time, you'd go into a bookstore, like if you were like the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, you went to a bookstore and looked at the fantasy section. It was like 2 shelves with half a dozen authors. So I can pretty much guarantee you that every fantasy author writing today has read these books, because they were popular when they were coming up. And additionally, because they sold so much, is one of the only reasons that a lot of these other books that got published later ever got a publishing contract, because David Eddings was the proof of success. So if David Eddings had not been a New York Times bestseller, Robert Jordan may have never gotten a publication contract. So if you read David Eddings, you can see a lot of where a lot of tropes come from, a lot of things that you commonly see in fantasy novels. Of course, J.R.R. Tolkien is the grandfather of all fantasy, so a lot of it comes directly from J.R.R. Tolkien, and that's where David Eddings took a lot of inspiration. But David Eddings was one of the first ones, one of the maybe half a dozen first authors, who took the J.R.R. Tolkien format and made it very accessible, and started using that really accessible, easy to read language like Brandon Sanderson is so famous for. So if you read David Eddings, there's a lot of things that they didn't come from J.R.R. Tolkien, a lot of them came from David Eddings. So you read the books and you've read the Brandon Sandersons and the Robin Hobbs and the Robert Jordans and the J.R.R. Martins, and you'll say, oh, okay, so that's where that came from. Because, like I said, you can tell reading modern fantasy that most of those authors have read David Eddings, or they've read books that were already inspired by David Eddings. So like I said, it's a very interesting historical read. And if you enjoy high fantasy, you may really enjoy the books. He did have a lot of massive fans back in the day, and I remember reading the Elenium originally, and I really like Sparhawk. I really enjoyed the books. He also has another series called the Belgariad, which is probably a little bit more famous than the Elenium, but we do not have copies in the library because, as I said, he has kind of fallen out of the modern lexicon for fantasy, and it's hard to find his books. But we do have the Elenium, and the Elenium I personally thought was a little bit better than the Belgariad, even though the Belgariad is a little more important, a little more popular book. But yeah, I would give him a read. It will definitely be educational for anybody who's a high fantasy fan. And you may really enjoy them. I said that they're not bad books. At worst, I'd say they're kind of mid, and you may love them, just depending on how you feel about the particular characters, because that makes such a wide difference in how people enjoy books, is how they feel about those specific characters. And you never know until you open up the book and start reading it, how you're going to relate. Okay, so I guess that brings me to a food item. I really like those sumo oranges, the ones with the belly button. They just peel super easy. So, and I appreciate that in an orange, is one that you can just rip off the little belly button and it basically pops right out of the peel without having to struggle with it. So, yeah, sumo oranges are good. Anyway, leave me a comment down below and let me know what you have been reading and eating lately, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.